Forgive and be free. Forgive and be free. So today we're going to have a bit of a conversation about the power of forgiveness. It's a practice of releasing judgment for the purpose of feeling free. And when we feel free, we are connected to what Mark Arnold and the Divine Groove were talking about. We are connected to love with a capital L. When we're free, we know the spiritual truth of who we are. So do you want that? Yes. Thank you. Yes, so do I. So do I. So I'm so glad to be here. I'm Reverend Karen Russo. I'm really appreciative that today not only is our beautiful senior minister, Reverend Karen Einhaus, in the kind of the end-ish period of her sabbatical, but our associate minister, who's been acting as our community spiritual director all summer, Reverend Leslie Goodwin, has the Sunday off. So we're going to have fun, and we are not, yes, like we're going to have fun. Yes. And we're not going to miss a beat, right? Because we really believe it's like, who's NVC? We are. All right. So forgiveness. I highly encourage each one of us to select an unforgiveness in our lives. So a grievance or an upset that we want to work with as we have this message. And so it could be something big and a big part of your life. It could be a major loss or a betrayal or some kind of tragedy or a trauma. You could select something like that. Or it could be a petty grievance with an in-law or a neighbor. Whatever level would be important for you. Or it could just be a judgment you have about today's political world. You know, maybe if anybody has any judgments. But choose something that is at stake for you. So will you do that? Okay, good. Some of you will. All right. So why is this so important? So I started on the spiritual journey almost 40 years ago. I was doing some math recently, and I was introduced to a spirituality as an adult through the 12-step programs. And one of the things that was like a what? Breakthrough moment for me was when I heard this line. So I believe we have it on a slide. It's from Alcoholics Anonymous, and the line is this: "It is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness." It is plain. It is plain. That was not plain to me. At the time, I had a lot of problems. I had issues, and most of my issues were that, you know, my coworkers or my boss or my clients, they were this way or that way. I had problems because I didn't have the body or the boyfriend or the this or that I thought I should have. I had problems that were mostly due to people, places, things, and by the way, my own addictions to substances. So I didn't realize that. I didn't realize, even for a moment, that there was something I was doing, like holding a deep resentment, that was contributing to my experience of life. And I got to tell you, just that idea, it just shifted everything. That rather than thinking all of these things are causing my life experience, to the idea that something I had dominion over was the cause. So what I want to say is, holding the resentment, it's painful to us, and we do have power in it. So forgiveness is essentially the release of anger, guilt, frustration, and when it's something that's called a resentment, the word, like from the Latin, means to tear. So resentment is the grinding over a thing. It's not just that we were hurt, it's that a story happened about it, a story about who we are, and we grind over it again and again and what we should have said, and that's what holding a resentment is. It hurts us. So when we have a grievance, it's painful to us. And there's a researcher, Fred Luskin, the author of Forgive for Good. He's a researcher at Stanford University, and the Stanford University Forgiveness Project found that when people hold a grievance, they're more likely to make bad decisions, more likely to experience depression, their immune responses are less robust, and there's more frequency of cardiovascular and cancer. So, I mean, like the research says, forgiveness, good. Holding resentment's bad. So, why don't we just do it? Why don't we just engage in forgiveness all the time? And the reason for that is we have resistance to forgiveness, and part of it has to do with misconceptions. So I'll start with a couple of them. Forgiveness is not. So think of that thing that's in your mind that you want to grind over, and here's some things that forgiveness is not. So forgiveness is not denial. So forgiveness is not pretending it didn't happen or minimizing the hurt that happened. It's really important to be factually accurate. That's a psychologically and spiritually healthy thing to do. This is what happened. Forgiveness is not enabling. So when we forgive, sometimes we think, I need to hold on to this, or else they'll keep doing it, or else, I'm saying that I'm co-signing their behavior. But this is one of the key principles of our teaching, and a key principle for a free life, is that all of us are a choice. And as much as we think, if I hold on to this, I can make them be different, it's an illusion. We do not have control over what other people do or don't do, say or don't say, feel or don't feel, think or don't think. And so forgiveness is not enabling, and it's not avoiding consequences. So when we choose to forgive, it doesn't mean that we have to reconcile with the person, or that we avoid legal or practical or ethical or moral consequences. And finally, forgiveness is not for them. And so you've probably heard that expression, the unforgiveness is like drinking the poison hoping that they die. Really, the forgiveness is for us to loosen the burden. And so, what is forgiveness? Forgiveness, pretty simply, it's a spiritual, mental, emotional practice. It's something that we do. And as a spiritual practice, there's two major universal principles in the science of mind, right? There's love, the idea that all of life is a cohesive whole. And the aspect of that brings us into forgiveness is that it's true. Who we are, essentially, is more than anything we have ever done. It's more than anything done to us. So our oneness with life itself, that's part of the spiritual aspect of forgiveness. The other universal principle in our teaching, Science of Mind, is the law, that life is lawful. And what that means is that our consciousness creates our experience, and so that our mental and emotional choices are powerful. I want to point out that all religious traditions have some form of repentance, forgiveness, some form of the idea that life is lawful. And that's a part of what makes forgiveness a powerful practice. And for what really forgiveness is, it's releasing the judgment. And when we do that, it's a really good idea. So remember Fred Luskin at the Stanford University Project. When people do forgive, stress levels go down, blood pressure stabilizes, we're less susceptible to illness, and we have more joy, creativity, and hope. So engaging in forgiveness is a good idea. Dr. Ernest Holmes, the founder of the Science of Mind, says this about forgiveness. Neither the consciousness of spirit nor the laws of the universe hold anything against us. And so this is another essential idea. In our teaching, we do not believe there is a sky god who is arbitrarily causing car accidents here and illnesses there, and that there's an arbitrary nature of the divine who we need to please and ask for forgiveness. Forgiveness is the choice we make to stand in the sunlight of the Spirit, to experience the unconditional love of God, which is for you, which is for me, which is for all of us. And this other aspect about the laws of the universe. So as I said, across the religious traditions, this idea is so profound that life is lawful. So at the heart of Judaism and the ancient Egyptians, life is lawful. It even, if you think about teachings like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that metaphysically speaking, is one of the most simple and profound ways that says, as we are to life, life is to us, and that the law is impersonal, so that eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth is an upgrade from the idea that there's a God causing bad things for some and not for the other. I really want us to step into the awareness that life is happening. Our response to it is our free will, and that choice is the most powerful choice that we have. Yeah. And so how do we forgive? Don't worry, I have a 5-step process coming in a slide or two, right? But I do want to tell one of the most inspiring forgiveness stories that I've ever heard. And I want to share it with you because it's not always easy to forgive. And I recognize that for some of you, there may be deep core things that either you have done or have happened to you that it's really hard. The idea of letting go of them is partly letting go of your identity. So I just want to be sensitive to that. But I want to tell you a story that's always inspired me. So we have a slide that shows Tariq Kamisa and Tony Hicks. So it's 1995, and Tariq Kamisa is a 22-year-old college student in San Diego area. And to make money at night, he is delivering pizzas. And Tony Hicks is a young teenager. He's just 14. And he's had some challenges, and he's gotten in with a gang. And that gang decided that they're going to do an initiation. And so they made phone calls, this was the 1990s, made phone calls to order some pizzas. And Tariq came with pizzas. And they were going to rob him, but Tariq said no, got back in his car, and as he was rolling up the window, the other boy said to Tony, "Shoot him." And he did. So Tariq died. Tony Hicks, 14 years old, was the first person in California. There was a new law that a 14-year-old should be tried as an adult. So he was tried as an adult and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. So a terrible story, right? And it could have ended there. But Tariq's father, Azim Kamisa, a devout Sufi Muslim, had a different experience. So in the midst of the 40 days of mourning for his son Tariq, Azim had an epiphany, fell to the kitchen floor, and had the realization there were victims at both ends of the gun. There were victims at both ends of the gun. And he had the strong awareness that he was going to grieve his beautiful son, but after those 40 days, what Azim did is he reached out to Tony's grandfather, Ples Felix, and he reached out in grace and forgiveness. Those two men came together, and for decades, and it started slow, but it grew, they had a practice called, they started the Tariq Kamisa Foundation, and they would go to middle schools together, tell the story to young kids, and talk about what really happens with gun violence, talk about the effect of violence, and they would have the kids sign a peace pledge. And it was a beautiful thing. Can you just feel it? It's like, what a beautiful thing. So the two of them created this beautiful change in what happened. And over the years, Azim created a relationship with Tony, the young man who had murdered his son. And Azim eventually spoke at Tony's probation hearings. Tony was released from prison. Today, Tony Hicks and Tariq's sister are keeping the legacy going. They are keeping the legacy of creating peace, being all about preventing violence from happening, and showing the power of forgiveness. So one of the reasons I share this, it's beautiful, isn't it? It's a beautiful story. Yeah, we love that. Yeah. And one of the reasons I share that is I think about some of the things that are my grievances, and they are so petty. I mean, maybe it's just me, but it's kind of like a story like this, and I'm like, you know, that thing that happened where this one said that thing, it's like maybe I could let that go. Right? Yeah. So I hope that for you, you can find just something in that makes you, like, it's good for us to have, it's called a mental equivalent in science of mind. It's good for us to have a spiritual vibration of what could be that's high. All right. So here's our 5 steps to forgiveness. All right. So we want to forgive. The first thing in whatever your situation is, whatever my situations are, we want to stop the harm. So what that means is we might want to get abstinent with the behavior or with the activity that we're engaging in. It might mean, if we want to stop the harm, that we set a boundary. Reverend Leslie Goodwin did a wonderful message about boundary setting earlier this summer. It might mean that we want to stop defending ourselves. There's a Course in Miracles lesson, in my defenselessness, my safety lies, which talks about the power of not trying to defend, which is really a version of attacking. So we want to stop the harm. We want to stop grinding over the thing. We want to stop the harm that it's causing. And then express it all. So you remember Fred Luskin. So he did all this research about forgiveness. And then he decided he wanted to take his message out in the world. So he started a forgiveness group for divorced women. And he gathered these women around, and they all told their stories of, horrible ex-husbands and terrible situations. They told all the stories. And Fred said, I have some research to show you. And he's like, if you forgive, you get, better immune response, and you have less of this. He showed his research. Moment passed. One of the women raised her hand and said, but you don't know my ex-husband. So it's important to not just get it out as in like tell it again, tell it again, tell it again. It's really important to get it out in the once and for all type of way. So it's a little bit of a nuance here, but I don't suggest you just keep repeating the story over and over again, right? It's a really good idea to write it out, get in touch with the emotions, and then maybe meet with one of our beautiful Science of Mind practitioners, have a session where you tell it once and for all. There are beautiful groups. There's a group called Compassionate Friends for people who have lost children, where the focus is on identification, but also on healing. So the expression is you got to get what happened, get it out. And then what you discover are the gems of the judgments. So what are the thoughts that I'm thinking about myself and about life that are keeping me in bondage? That's what a judgment is. So if you think about it, the judgment is the thing that makes it a problem. And we had in our Politics, Prayers, and Peace session a few weeks ago, and I asked Glenda if I could share this, we used forgiveness as a theme, and Glenda just stood up and said, without judgment, there's no need to forgive. And we all went, oh, yeah, it's getting like, oh. So particularly you think about it, and the political area is a perfect one to think about. So if there's a situation that's happening, you may not agree with it, and so you want to put your energy somewhere else. You may have a different point of view on an issue, but it's when we start to think those people are fill in the blank, and this means fill in the blank, and we start to be afraid and angry and judgmental, that's when it starts to be a weight on us. So be willing to find out, what are the judgments I'm thinking that are keeping me stuck? And then be willing to change. There's a beautiful speaker, she's a Unity minister, Reverend Edwene Gaines, and she was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And what she refused, her willingness to change is, I am no longer thinking of myself as a victim. I am a woman of power, she says, because I have experienced the misuse of power. And she has a whole different relationship to power because she was willing to have it be different. And then the final piece is you make the choice. You release the judgment and you choose freedom. And sometimes that means refraining from re-engaging in it. Sometimes it means a real change. But the release happens after all the other pieces. And so, when you're a minister and you're preparing messages, we usually get the counseling in school. Some of the folks in here know this, that when you tell a story about yourself, you should always tell stories where you were lost, but now you're found. Like the stories where it's like, you're already on the other side of it. But because otherwise you would be letting them see you're behind, and not in a good way, right? So, my heart is pounding. Because yesterday, I didn't follow any of these steps, okay? And I'm taking a risk here. I'm going to just tell you, I'm not going to. So yesterday, Bill and I are coming back from the airport, and the Lyft driver said something that totally triggered me. And it's the saying, when they go low, I went medium. I didn't go high, okay? So to make a long, painful story, I engaged. I tried to, Bill's looking over at me like, oh, man. But I couldn't. And part of it was, anyway, I engaged, didn't really go well. We finally got home. I said to the driver, I was like, I'm going to hold you in a lot of blessings. I didn't really mean it. I said that, but I walked in. And I was so angry. I was so ticked off and angry. And I was like, you don't understand, Bill is such a saint. I was like, you don't understand. And what I got was all the times the slightly racist, misogynist things were said, and I didn't say anything. And it was like, that's the problem. All those times I didn't say anything. There's so much anger. And maybe some of you, will relate to that. But what I really got to was my chest was awful. So I had to do, I was like, boy, I could certainly use a message about forgiveness. I had to go through what I got to is two things that I really want to share with you. That these past situations, I have not fully expressed what I wish I would have expressed then to a loving person that could hear me. So I've got two situations where I need to do some writing. And the other piece is, and this is the final thing we'll leave you with, I have to forgive myself. So I did not behave well yesterday. I have to forgive myself. So all forgiveness ultimately has some form of self-forgiveness, letting ourselves off the hook for what has happened. So I invite you, for the situation that you've got, this week, work with the process, but also work with how you can let yourself off the hook. Because when we forgive, we set the Lyft drivers, the people from the past, all the different people, we set everybody and ourselves free. Do you want that? Yes, we do. All right. So let us pray. So how grateful I am to recognize that the infinite holds not against us, that love is real, that life is a cohesive whole, and that always we are at choice. Infinite God, Mother, Father, Presence, Spirit, Life, we recognize infinite reality that is moving, living, and having its way in, through, and as each of us. That is the foundation from which I speak this word this day. I claim for all who are connected to this message now and forevermore that we find the freedom, the choice, the creativity, the flow, and the power of God alive in us, and that we share the gifts with all. I give great thanks for the good of God revealing in this prayer. I give thanks that the law says yes, and I release this word. I trust. I know that what is spoken is so, and together we say, and so it is.